Okay, this is our final portion of Chapter 43's lecture on the immune system. And this hopefully will be a shorter video. But we left off talking about HIV and AIDS, and I wanted to just backtrack a short minute here to talk a little bit more about allergies. So again, an allergy is a hypersensitive or exaggerated response to different environmental antigens. These environmental antigens that get this kind of response are called allergens, Allergergens. The most common allergies involve antibodies from the IgE class of immunoglobulins. So, for example, hay fever is going to occur when the B plasma cells secrete IgE that are specific for a pollen allergen. So sometimes these, and most often actually, these IgE antibodies attach by their base to the mast cells that are located in the connective tissue. So for example, the mast cells located in our nasal lining are often what are going to have IgE antibodies present there. So then when a pollen grain enters the body through our nose and attaches to the antigen binding site of the mast cell with that IgE attached, then that antibody receptor there is going to trigger the mast cell to release a lot of histamines and other inflammatory chemicals from vesicles within the mast cell that are called granules. So this will lead to what we typically see as allergy symptoms like sneezing, runny nose, teary eyes, and smooth muscle contractions that can result in difficult breathing. So often our course of action is to take an antihistamine. So it is just what it sounds like. It's antihistamine, and it diminishes symptoms by blocking the receptors for histamine. But sometimes we get an acute allergic reaction, and that results in what's called anaphylactic shock, which is a whole body life-threatening reaction to either an ingested or injected allergen. So anaphylactic shock results when we have a widespread release of mast cell contents, and that again triggers a quick dilation of the peripheral blood vessels, which causes a very steep drop in blood pressure and then a constriction of some of the lung tissue. So it actually can cause death within minutes due to the lack of blood flow and the inability to breathe. So people who are susceptible to this often have to carry injections of epinephrine, which can counteract this allergic response. Okay, so now finishing up with the HIV here, just so the distinction between HIV and AIDS is that HIV is the virus that, or pathogen that causes the destruction of helper T cells, and then acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS, is the resulting disease when you don't have any functioning helper T cells. So that a person often dies of AIDS because they have no way to fight with that third line of defense. They cannot fight other infections. So finally, our key attributes of the immune system can really be boiled down to these four things. So one is that makes it so very effective is its specificity. That third line of defense that allows vertebrates to have an antigen-antibody specificity makes our immune system very efficient. But at the same time, we have a wide diversity of an ability to deal with the wide diversity of antigens. So we're able to react to millions of antigens, and we can do that with the third attribute, which is a memory. So our B cells and our T cells actually are able to remember previous antigens, which increases dramatically our response, which is called the secondary response to an infection. So if an infection happens a second time, that secondary response is due to the memory cells. And then the fourth thing is, in a normal, healthy functioning immune system, the ability to distinguish self from non-self is a very important attribute of our immune system. And that occurs through the maturation and actually a training process within the lymph system to reduce autoimmune disease. So we're going to finish with this animation which shows the immune response. And this is put out by McGraw-Hill. Very excellent. So hopefully you'll be able to follow this with your new knowledge of the different vocabulary terms of the immune system.
Activation of the immune response typically begins when a pathogen enters the body. Macrophages that encounter the pathogen ingest, process, and display the antigen fragments on their cell surfaces. Macrophages with antigen fragments displayed on their surfaces are called antigen-presenting cells. An antigen-presenting macrophage interacts with a T helper cell that can recognize the same antigen. During the interaction, the macrophage releases a chemical alarm signal called interleukin-1, which stimulates the T helper cell to secrete interleukin-2. Interleukin-2 causes the proliferation of certain cytotoxic T cells and B cells. The immune response from this point follows two paths, one using cytotoxic T cells and one using B cells. Normal cells of the body that become infected can also digest some of the pathogens and display antigen fragments on their cell surfaces. The body makes millions of different types of cytotoxic T cells. Each type is able to recognize a particular antigen. The cytotoxic T cells that are capable of recognizing the antigen displayed on the surfaces of infected cells bind to the infected cells and produce chemicals that kill the infected cell. Death of the infected cells results in destruction of the pathogen. B cells also come in millions of different types, each able to recognize a particular antigen. When B cells become activated by T helper cells, they differentiate into plasma cells. These plasma cells become antibody-producing factories, flooding the bloodstream with antibodies that can bind to the antigen involved in this infection. Antibodies bind to the antigens on the surfaces of the pathogens, marking them for destruction by macrophages. Some of the B cells do not turn into antibody factories, but instead become memory B cells that may survive for several decades. Because of these memory B cells, the secondary immune response to a future infection by the same pathogen is swifter and stronger. This powerful secondary immune response is what gives immunity to some diseases after you have had them once or after you have been vaccinated.
Okay, so that is a summary of how we have the immune response. And again, remember this is the acquired immune response. So hopefully this is a good introduction for you. Study up on the terms and watch this as often as you need to. Also, you can find other animations on this website that I just showed you. Let me it's actually on the last slide that I showed you, so you can go back and look at this McGraw-Hill education website for some other animations about the immune response. That's it for now.